Hello everyone and welcome back to Corndog Creates. For this video, I decided to do another Hot Wheels conversion because I had so much fun doing my last one. But this time I'm going a little bigger and making more cars and turning them into a diorama with a base for them to sit on. I started with a wooden base that I got from a Dollar Tree store, and I measured and cut a piece of styrofoam board to fit on top and glued it down. Next, I took what was left of the foam board and I cut it into smaller pieces and glued those on as well. Next, I wanted to shape the foam, so I grabbed the pencil and drew out the rough shape I wanted and used my hot knife to carve into the foam until I got it to the shape I was looking for. If you try this, make sure that you're using a respirator of some kind to protect yourself from the fumes. Melting foam can be very toxic, so please keep yourself safe. Once I had the shape I wanted, I used a box cutter with a longer, more flexible flat blade to smooth out the curves. You could easily use a box cutter for this whole process, so if that's all you have, that'll work perfectly fine. Next, I grabbed some foam that I got from the floral department of Walmart and started cutting it into blocks of different sizes. This foam is very different from the styrofoam board I used earlier. It's very squishy and breaks apart really easily if you squeeze it too hard. I think you're meant to stick flowers in it and be able to water it, but I'm not sure. But it's perfect for what I need it for. Once I had the blocks cut out, I used my X-Acto knife to shape the foam into smoother, somewhat round shapes. I want this base to look like a dried up riverbed between two hills, so these will act as rocks and stones. Next, I gave them a shake in my container of real rocks and I glued them around the base, making sure to be as random as I could with them. Next, I brushed on some watered down glue in the river section of the diorama and laid down some tiny rocks to add some more definition to the area, and I set the base aside to dry. Once I was dry, I covered the riverbed, rocks, and hillsides with a mixture of spackle, Mod Podge, and brown paint. This was to give it a layer of protection and to add some extra texture. Then I added some sand to the mixture and spread that around the flat areas of the diorama to give the look of dirt. I also added some to the sides of the foam off camera as well before setting it aside to dry once more. Next, it's time for the fun part, modifying the cars. I'm going to give a pretty quick explanation of the process in this video, but if you'd like a full walkthrough, I'll put a card on the top right of the screen up here for my original Hot Wheels modification video, and you guys can check it out after you're done watching this one. The steps are mostly the same, but I did make a few changes. I'll explain those when I get to those parts though. First step is going to be taking the cars apart. A drill is basically a must for this. I tried using a Dremel in my last conversion, but getting the rivets out was so much easier with a drill. Definitely make sure you're being careful to not risk damage to your hands or fingers though. When they were all in pieces, it was time to add on the extra bits and the weapons. In my last video, I did mostly range weapons on the cars, but I found a couple packs of toys with some small blades in them, so I decided to incorporate those into this build. So I used some sandpaper to scuff up the surface of the cars and all of the weapons before using super glue to hold them in place. I used baking soda to speed up the drying process in the last video, but this time I used a mix of rubbing alcohol and baking soda. I also used clear Gorilla Glue on all of the metal pieces that I made out of foam. Super glue melts foam, so I wouldn't recommend using it. I didn't really have a plan for any of these cars. I just picked a couple pieces I wanted to use and started gluing them onto cars. I improvised with everything and wasn't really worried too much about the end result. This is just a fun project and it's supposed to be a fictional, futuristic world anyway, so there's really no right or wrong. Another change that I made from the last video was I found an old window screen and used a piece of it to cover some of the windows and windshields of the cars. Last time I used some plastic mesh and it was a bit too bulky for my liking, so I'm glad I found this screen. And lastly, before painting, I gave all the pieces of foam a coat of clear glue with a paintbrush off camera to protect it from the spray paint later. Once all the pieces were added to the cars, it was time for the first set of painting. First I gave them a coat of black primer spray paint, and then I used my airbrush to give them all a coat of a reddish orange rust color. Then I used a paintbrush to dab on a mix of red, brown, orange, and a yellow oxide randomly around the cars. And then I added a little more red to the mixture and did another couple dabs to add some color variety to the rust. Next I took my X-Acto knife and some toothpaste and spread it over the places I wanted the rust to show. You could use masking fluid or liquid latex for this part, but toothpaste is cheap, already in my bathroom, and does the job just fine. The last thing I wanted to do before moving on to the main airbrushing section was make some trees and bushes for the diorama. For this I took some twine and unraveled it into the individual strands and spread them out to look like strands of hair and laid them out flat. Then I cut some 20 gauge wire to double the length of what I wanted the tree or bush to be and bent the wire in half and put the twine between it. With the help of my drill, I looped one end of the wire to it and held the other end with some pliers and slowly spun it so that the strands twisted around to look like branches. Then I just used some scissors to trim them down and some wire cutters to trim off the loops on the ends. Now that everything was ready, I pulled out my makeshift airbrush box and fan and added a layer of brown to the whole base. Then I added a reddish brown to the sides of the hills to give a clay-like look, and then a couple darker browns to the riverbed to make it seem like water was recently there. Then I gave the trees I primed black a spray of dark green paint. Next I painted all of the bottoms of the cars a light gray color, the engines and pipes a silver color, and all of the bodies their own individual colors. Once the base coats were finished drying, I used a wet Q-tip to carefully wipe away the toothpaste. I didn't want to rub or dab too hard because I didn't want to risk rubbing off the rust color underneath. I did mess up a few spots, but it's fine, and it didn't really make much of a difference anyways. I let everything sit for about 30 minutes to really let the paint dry, and then started the last bit of painting. I used a silver color for all of the armor plating, the barrels of the guns, and all of the sharp weapons, and a pavement gray color for the other parts of the guns. The next thing I wanted to do was add some washes to the base to add a bit of a gradient and to darken up the deeper parts. I just used a brush to dab on some of the wash and then used a paper towel to wipe up the excess. I used a burnt sienna wash on the hillsides to bring out the red clay color, and a burnt umber wash on the flat areas, the riverbed, and the sides of the diorama, followed by a black wash over the whole thing. Now that all the painting was done and dry, it was time to decorate the base. I made a few different tall grass patches off camera and placed them around the diorama. Next I used a brush to spread some glue around key parts of the diorama. Then I used a mesh strainer to add some homemade grass made from twine, making sure to completely cover all of the glued areas. Next I had some plastic lavender that I got from a dollar store, and I cut a couple pieces off and placed them around to add a little extra color. And lastly I used a toothpick to press holes into the foam for all of the trees and bushes I made earlier, and used hot glue to hold them in place. I'm not sure how, but I didn't record adding a wash to the cars, but I did add a mix of burnt umber and black to dirty them up a little. But to make them look a little dirtier, I gave all of them a couple coats of brown and black pigment powders. And after that, all that was left was to glue the cars in their places, give the sides a coat of black paint, and that, my friends, is a forest ambush diorama. Thank you guys so much for coming in to watch the video. I hope you all enjoyed it and come back to join me in the next one. If you did like it, make sure to give it a thumbs up because it really helps me out. Also, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can see when all my future videos come out. Thank you all for watching. My name is Corndog, and see you all in the next video.